It's lovely to be with you. Thank you for the invitation to speak tonight. I can't begin without, first of all, promoting my book, which you must buy. It's called Recovering His Reputation, and it's about 25 years of ministry in St. Michael's, Aberystwyth. It's available on Amazon UK. Do buy it. Quite often, preachers are speaking out of their own experience of what the scriptures are impressing on their souls at any particular time and reflecting perhaps the circumstances that they're going through themselves. And I want then to think with you this evening for a brief while about the nature of God's guidance and how it applies to us individually and to our current circumstances. Some few years ago, Prue and I were visiting the city of Seville in Spain, and we're going to stay overnight in a hotel. We booked our room and everything was sorted, and we had been given a map and directions of how to get there. Now, if you've ever visited the city of Seville, you will know that they've got the most tortuous one-way system. It's the kind of system that you cannot retrace your steps, or at least we couldn't find any way of doing it. It seems to eat you up and then just push you in one direction and one direction only. And that direction is in a complete circle. So we spent about an hour driving around the center of Seville, and we did a complete circuit twice. And we were arriving at the same set of traffic lights for the third time. And I recognized them from before. And I thought to myself, we can't possibly continue doing this for the rest of the night. We're never ever going to find the hotel. So there was a taxi rank alongside the road. I pulled in at the back of the taxis, and I began to talk to one of the taxi drivers. I showed him the instructions, and I showed him the name of the hotel, and he immediately began to tell me the way to it. Of course, he was telling me in Spanish, which was absolutely hopeless. And I was so keen to get there that I pointed at his car, and I pointed at my car, and I pointed at his car, and I pointed at my car, and I indicated to him that I wanted him to drive ahead and I would follow him. Well, he got the idea. So he drove up to the traffic lights, and instead of driving through them, which I'd done on the previous two occasions, he turned immediately right, and then he turned immediately left down a narrow street that I'd not seen before. Just round the corner was the hotel, literally 300 yards away from where we'd stopped on the taxi rank. Now he enjoyed the joke at my expense of our lostness and of all of the problems that we'd faced. I laughed with him, but out of relief at the fact that we'd arrived, rather than I thought that it was particularly funny. But I can still remember, as I described the event to you, the mix of emotions of being bewildered, of being frustrated and angry, of being humiliated that I couldn't follow a map, and being anxious about the fact that it was getting dark, and the prospect was of us sleeping in the car on the streets of Seville or just driving aimlessly around the center of the city hour after hour. The point of the story is this, that God doesn't like his people to be lost because he's got a compassionate heart. He cannot bear it when his people are lost. And he has made all of the provisions that are necessary in order to prevent that from happening. The result of God's compassionate heart is that he guides us, and guidance is a given. He doesn't need to have it persuaded out of him. We don't have to conquer his reluctance to give it. He's got two complementary kinds of guidance that are available to us. One is somewhat static, whilst the other one is mobile. One comes in a block. The other one is more fluid. One you have to keep coming back to time and time again. The other travels with you as you go. One can be predicted in advance to some degree, the other less so. The two kinds of guidance that I'm talking about are the guidance that God gives us through principle that he's already revealed to us, and the guidance that God gives to us through providence and his intervention in our circumstances. And I want to look at those two just briefly, side by side tonight. So first of all, guidance through principle. Really, from the beginning of recorded time, the Lord has been revealing to humanity various principles of behavior which will stand us in good stead if we follow them. This is the guidance which is static, it's block-like, it's to some degree predictable because we know what it says, and it will never stop saying what it says. Every time we come back to it, it's going to say the same thing as it always has. And we do need then to come back to it repeatedly. The summary of this block-like principle is equivalent to two hedges alongside a pathway. They are parallel hedges. On the one side, there is the command that we should love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our strength. And then the equivalent hedge on the other side of the pathway, the second hedge, is the concern for love for others. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And those two commands remain as enduring guidance to us, to protect us from the dangers of the unknown on either side of the path, and to provide us with security as we journey. The hedges are high enough to give clarity as to our direction of travel, but they are low enough for us to climb over them if we find that we don't want to be contained by them or restricted by them. But the Lord has not left us just with those principles. He has expanded on them and given us more detailed instructions. And of course, the scriptures are absolutely full of them. And we could go to a whole host of different places and draw upon them. Let me just give you three. Pay your bills promptly. How about that for an instruction about loving your neighbor as yourself? Do not hold back the wages of a hired worker overnight. Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 34. Or a very, very contemporary application of the principle of love your neighbor. Be hospitable to refugees. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Or instructions to business people. Do not use dishonest standards when measuring length, weight, or quantity. There's enough guidance here and elsewhere in the Bible, in the principles that we have been given, to help us to live safely, healthily, and successfully in the family, in the community, and in a wider national context. I asked for that reading from Psalm 119 this evening, because not only is it a cleverly composed psalm, and all of us know that each section of it begins with the next letter of the Hebrew alphabet, so that it's divided into 22 sections. But what is fascinating about the psalm is that the principles that the Lord has laid down for our behavior are described in 10 different words. Each word overlaps with another word to some extent and brings new meaning to the whole. The breadth of these 10 words is considerable, and it shows how comprehensive the scriptures are in their instructions to us. These are the 10. His principles are described as, firstly, his law, secondly, his way, thirdly, his testimonies, fourthly, his commandments, fifthly, his precepts, sixthly, his word, seventhly, his judgments, eighthly, his righteousness, ninthly, his statutes, tenthly, his truth. Together, those 10, which all are repeated fairly frequently in the psalm, they cover a wide range of instructions and circumstances. They're comprehensive, and they're there for our protection, our security, and our overall happiness. Now, in the way that the Lord deals with us, He doesn't infantilize us, but he doesn't make us into dependent children who are asking all the time, what am I supposed to do next? I've done that, now what's the next, and what's the next, and what's the next? He's given us principles to live by, which are covered by those 10 words. And it's now our responsibility to work out how they are to be applied, and we are then to choose to live by them. This is principled guidance. It's available to everybody. It is static, unchanging, block-like, somewhat predictable, simply because it doesn't change. And we have to continually return to it and wrestle with it and apply it. It's much less exciting than the second set of guidance that I'm going to talk about in a moment. Guidance by providence, a guidance that comes through the Lord's direct intervention, sometimes surprisingly. But nonetheless, as we follow this guidance by principle, as we allow ourselves to be instructed by it, so we develop a character of maturity and confidence and sure-footedness. We might call it, by a single word, adulthood. That's the purpose of those principles and the guidance that they bring to us. So let's have a look then at the second series, the second method of guidance through God's providence, the intervention of the Lord in our personal circumstances. This is much more fluid. It's on the move. It's rarely the same twice, and we have to keep our eye out for it and to follow it. Sometimes it happens in our circumstances in a semi-hidden way, and we have to be alert to it. Sometimes it happens in a totally hidden way, and then we simply have to trust ourselves to the providence of God. This is something that is spoken about very little and has almost disappeared from Christian conversation. But very often, this kind of providential guidance weaves together the bad and the good, the setbacks and the advances, the defeats and the victories, so that absolutely nothing is wasted of our human experiences, and so that there is value in all that happens, even though it's difficult to see it sometimes. I want to illustrate the point that I'm trying to make through the experience of the children of Israel leaving Egypt. So we use the psalm in order to illustrate guidance through principle, and now the experience of the children of Israel to illustrate guidance through providence. The children of Israel have been, in inverted commas, expelled from Egypt. They've been told to go. The first thing that happens to them is that God refuses to take shortcuts with them. The most direct route would be for them to go immediately north towards the promised land. But if they did that, they would have to go through Philistia. They would have to face the Philistines. And if they did that, their progress was uncertain. More than likely, they would have to fight. Now, the Lord knows their circumstances. He knows the strengths and weaknesses of his people. He knows what they can face and what they can't face. And because he is planning for their overall welfare, he doesn't allow them to go immediately north and to progress towards the promised land that way. He controls the level of difficulty that they are going to have to face in the initial stages of their release from slavery. I think that this is a hugely significant step where God is concerned. And we should be growing in our confidence in the love and compassion and generosity of God towards us as we meditate upon that theme. He controls the level of difficulty of the things that they have to face. Now, how do we know what the Lord was thinking at that time? It says that this is what God said, that they were to not to have to pass through that land. How do we know? Well, presumably he must have told Moses, and Moses must have told the people. Very often, God's reasoning is hidden from us. But the illustration from this point that we are making now is a guarantee of God's purposes always being benevolent towards his people and always for our good. Sometimes we don't understand. Sometimes it won't be revealed to us until we get to eternity. Sometimes by reflection and hindsight, we're able to see the hand of God upon our lives. What is interesting is that this providential care of God for his people is something that is firstly happening behind the scenes without any contribution whatsoever from them. They don't pray about guidance. They don't fast for guidance. They're not involved in the decision-making or the planning or the strategy. This is all of the Lord, and it flows out of his compassion for them. It is a given, and it's given to them. The pillar of cloud by day, the pillar of fire by night was not their idea. It was conceived in the heart of God as a provision which would give them encouragement and hope. Whenever they felt insecure or frightened, they only needed to look in the direction of the pillar of cloud or the pillar of fire, and their anxiety levels immediately subsided. So the first point then from this providential guidance of God is that there are no shortcuts. The second point is that God doesn't involve the children of Israel in the guidance that he's giving to them. And the third is that they participate in God's brilliant strategy. And so may we, if we cooperate with his providential care. First of all, we read here from the scriptures that the Lord sent them, the children of Israel, in the direction of the desert. That was the immediate first step. Then he tells them to change direction and to go towards the sea. Now, this looks like absolute confusion. What on earth is God up to? It looks like indecision. It looks like uncertainty. If Pharaoh sees it, he'll come to his own conclusion that they don't know what they're doing. They've got no experience of travel. They've been a settled people for 430 years. They've never been outside Egypt. The children of Israel are vulnerable once again and back within Pharaoh's grasp, and he could enslave them if he wanted to. So that's what it looks like to him. What does it look like to the children of Israel? They've been sent in one direction, and now they're being sent in another, almost in the opposite direction. The direction that they have been sent in is with their back to the sea and their face to an advancing army. They are literally between the devil and the deep blue sea. What does it appear like to them? Well, it appears to them that God is rubbish. They turn to Moses and they say, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us into the desert to die? That's rather an ironic question, isn't it, considering the graves in Egypt that are still being excavated today, maybe some of them that they themselves had built. It appears that God doesn't know his own mind. But this time, again, the Lord has explained to Moses what his purposes are, and Moses explains God's purpose to the people. And the Lord has got two things in mind. The first is the safety and well-being of his people. That has been his overriding concern in delivering them from Egypt, all of the plagues following one after the other in order to bring them out. Pharaoh and his army are going to be dealt with once and for all, and the children of Israel will never have to face them again. But here is the second overriding concern of the Lord. I will gain glory for myself. Through his providential guidance of his people, the Lord is going to get glory for himself. And that glory of the redemption of the children of Israel has lasted for whatever it is, 3,500 years, and continues to be remembered by the people of God up until today. Our current circumstances, whatever they may be, bring a twofold strategy of God into focus: our safety and his glory. These two things dominate his mind and dominate his strategies. So, in conclusion, regularly we need to work through the principles that the Lord has already given to us, and to continually look at their predictability and rejoice in the security that they give to us, the unchanging principles of God. But the second thing is us to be expectant of his providential guidance in every aspect of our lives. He's not waiting for us to ask. Guidance is a given. We should continue to wait for it if it isn't already clear. So God bless you as you wait for his guidance in your life. Amen.